Cryptid sightings all around the world have left us all dumbfounded as to what else is out there with us on this rock we call planet Earth. Are there truly unknown monsters lurking in the dark just out of sight, or is this just the product of overactive imaginations? Well, these subscribers shared their allegedly true cryptid stories that will surely freak you out. If you have a story you would like to share on the show, be sure to visit swamdweller.net and submit your story. I would love to share it with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that keep this channel going. Now, let's dive into these truly creepy and allegedly true cryptid stories. About a year ago, I was on my way home from purchasing some groceries on a quiet, dark night. The way back home was fairly normal and nothing of note really happened. When it was time to unload and move everything to the house, I got this weird feeling that is hard to describe. Now, let me explain the way my street is set up. I live on a cul-de-sac in the suburbs. We also live across the train tracks, so it's usually fairly quiet unless the train is passing through and blaring. Because we only have streetlights on the main road, every other road is left to be engulfed in darkness, unfortunately. As I'm offloading my groceries, my garage door is open and is the only light to be seen amongst the dark housing area. Observing the sky around me, I notice a figure walking up the street. It's merely a silhouette from the darkness, and the contrast of the light denies any fine details to be shown. But, for some reason, I felt fear. Whatever this thing is, it was walking on all fours. The thing has skinny and tall, slender legs. It may be seldom, but not surprising to see animals wandering out, as we do live by the woods as well. But I thought it was weird, as I had never seen an animal like that in this area before. The figure was unsettling to see, being alone in the night and all. Still curious, I saw the silhouette's neck move up, and I could tell it also had turned to look at me. Creeped out even more, I was ready to pack up as quick as possible. But then, the freaking thing starts approaching me. I want to say it ran, but I feel like that might be more of an exaggeration. Regardless, I shut off the light and closed my garage as quickly as possible and headed in for the night. I really did not want to meet whatever that freaking creature was. This happened 2 days ago, while my brother and I were metal detecting at an old homestead. It's deep in the snowy Minnesota woods near the Dakota Indian Reservation. If you know the climate, it's extremely cold. The thick, dense woods made it hard to see. My brother and I both are fairly familiar with these woods, and both of us got very athletic. We were about 5 miles in the woods when I found a dream catcher hanging from an old white pine with a deer skull carved into the tree. The reason I believe this was a deer skull is because it had large antlers. About an hour later, it was cold and about to go dark, so we decided that we would go home. But that's when we thought we heard our names being called in the wind. It was almost like a person, but it was warped. It was almost as if it was a voice sped up and slowed down at the same time. My brother thought it could be my mom, and so he called out her name. No one replied to this call, though. This made me scared, knowing someone or something could be out there with us. We turned off the trail and started to head back towards the homestead, and it was dark, but not too dark to the point to where we could not see. About 100 yards in front of us, there was a clearing with one tree in the middle. In this clearing, we saw a deer, or what looked to be a deer. Me being a stupid 15-year-old boy, I picked up a stick and threw it. It almost hit the deer, when I heard a blood-curdling scream come from behind us. I quickly snapped around and let out a scream, but no sound came from my mouth. 20 feet out of the clearing, where the deer had been, was an oak tree. The deer hung from the tree, its limbs severed from its torso. There is no way any animal I know can drag a deer into the tree that quickly, and if it were to attack, we would have heard it clearly. So, my question is, what killed that deer that night right in front of us? I was only 6 to 7 when this happened, but I remember everything. My mom had gone to work, so I stayed at home with my dad and little brother. My brother was playing with toys in the toy room while my dad and I were taking turns playing plug-and-play controllers. You will likely know what this is if you grew up in the early 2000s. Anyways, my dad had fallen asleep, so I ended up playing by myself. I was playing Mappy, a game about a mouse collecting artifacts and avoiding cats. I was pretty far into it, but my brother came up to me and wouldn't stop bothering me about something cool that he saw, and he wanted me to see it badly. I lost focus and ended up losing, so I said, "Fine, show me this stupid cool thing already," in the most annoyed tone a kid could give. Now, the one thing I left out about the toy room is that my dad had taken the door off and spun it around so that he could lock us in when we were bad. It was a pretty creepy room, mostly because it felt so empty and the light in the room was dim. My brother took me in the room and closed the door. I expected him to show me what he planned, but instead, he just turned around and smiled. I yelled at him over and over to show it to me, but he just kept smiling, and then eventually, the smile turned into a creepy laugh. I got tired of it and tried to leave the room to get back to my games, but it turns out my little brother locked the door. I yelled at him once more, but more aggressive this time. He just kept laughing. I started pounding on the door to wake my dad up. Then, I noticed my little brother had gone quiet. I turned around. He was now sitting on the toy slide we had in there. It was a small slide for babies, but he had a much more serious face. I actually got scared at that sight. He'd never made a face like that before. Then he looked up, and I did as well. He was looking at the vent on the ceiling. Then, I noticed something slowly starting to poke out. It was white, like paper white, and it was all wrinkly and veiny. If I had to describe it better, I'd say it looked like the forehead of a bald old man, slowly poking out, but the skin was just too white to be human. My eyes started to water and my brother began laughing again, louder than before. I started pounding on the door rapidly and screaming as loud as I could for my dad. I didn't dare look back again, but I heard it. I knew it wasn't human from the horrible sounds I had been making. My brother stopped laughing at that moment. But after that moment of me just pounding and nothing else, my brother let out a scream louder than I had ever heard. Like he was getting tortured. I still couldn't look back though. I was too scared. My crying and begging for the door to open just became louder. My dad then finally opened the door and I burst out. Only then did I look into the room, but there wasn't anything there, just my little brother crying and holding his leg. My dad went to check it out and he had a large deep cut on the side of his leg. I told my dad what happened, but he just gave me a hit in the back of the head for trying to lie, and my little brother, I could have sworn, had smiled at me again. But I didn't look too well, if I'm honest. I grew up starting to think it was just a nightmare, like I've been told every time I speak of this memory. And maybe it was, but my brother still has a scar on where I remember he had gotten cut, but I don't know if I believe it anymore. One time when I was about 13 or 14, I was living in a small town in southern Ohio. I was a scared kid and didn't like the woods after dark. I hated it when I had to take the trash out at night because I always thought that something was lurking there. One night my terrors came true. I had stepped outside to return to my garage as I was having a friend over, and that was where we were sleeping. I had a large metal rod with me, because I don't like to be without a weapon outside. Out of nowhere, I heard a low growl. It sounded like a large cat, specifically a bobcat. I started to walk faster at that moment, but that's when I saw something fall out of the tree. Then I heard my sister's voice say that she needed help. I ran inside to find my dad and uncles and asked them of this encounter. They all got their guns out and hopped into my uncle's truck. They searched for about 15 minutes and found nothing. I was shaken from my encounter and was more worried when I heard they found nothing. Later on that week though, I saw a pale-looking deer running on 2 feet down the road into the woods opposite of my house. I haven't seen it since, but I swear, it looked at me, and it spoke, the same voice that I heard that night. I have seen many weird things and I hope to share them in the future. As for my friend, we went inside for the rest of that night. Honestly, I really don't know if these things are connected, but I can't explain this weird, bipedal deer that seems to sound like a little girl. This story happened to me when I was a little kid, around 4 or 5 years old. When I was this young, my family and I lived in Dallas, Texas at the time. I was acting up and being really annoying, as I was really hyper as a child. My parents told me if I didn't calm down, they would send me to the monster in their closet. As I was skeptical at this point, not believing them, I continued doing what I was doing. I can't remember what I was doing, but now I wish I had listened to them. Being fed up, they told me to go to their room and to keep the light off. I was afraid of the dark, but at this point I still kinda am, so I sat there on the bed bawling my eyes out. I start to hear a sound coming from the closet. I wish I could tell you I wasn't scared. To be honest, I was terrified at this point. The door slowly swung open, revealing a human-shaped figure. It looked like a human but thinner, and it looked to be wearing a really old mask-like thing. It was grunting and growling at me, moving with inhuman steps. I tried to scream from what I was seeing, but no sound left my mouth. I backed up to the window as it got closer, hoping it would go over the bed and not block the door so I could run out. Before the thing got any closer to me, I started to run as fast as I could. Much like a cartoon, my feet were running in place before I was finally able to move to the door. I flung the door open and ran out crying, and I asked who they had helping them in a panicked voice, as I was a skeptic at the time. They looked at me puzzled and had a slight look of panic as their little girl was saying that there was another human in their room. Then they chuckled, saying that there was no one here but us. I must have looked pale and panicked, so they went to check. There was absolutely nothing there, but their closet light was on. It was a walk-in with the light switch on the wall by the door. I never saw that thing again, but I kept hearing sounds of light pounding on my walls and ceiling. This, as anticlimactic as it is the end of this story. Thank you for listening. Hello there, this is my first time sharing a story with you and probably my last. I live in northern Oklahoma in a small town. I've read the stories about skinwalkers and all those things that go bump in the night, and I've even listened to stories here and there on YouTube. Now I guess it's time I should tell you what happened to my encounter. I was walking home on a moonlit night. Nothing seemed out of ordinary. I made it to the train tracks when I heard a tree branch snap. I looked in the direction of where it came from and I saw it. About 20 feet away, I saw what appeared to be a deer crawling in the open field. Now, one thing you should know about me at the time is, I was a huge gun fanatic, so I always carried a small firearm. I did the stupidest thing. I shot at it with my pistol. I missed and oh my god, it stood up on its hind legs. It scared the absolute heck out of me, because I knew. After it stood up, I just knew what it was. I ran as fast as I could to my house. The one thing that scared me the most was that it was chasing me, screaming my name. I finally made it to my house, and I looked back and it was walking back to the tree line. It kept going until I couldn't see it. The one thing going off in my mind was, should I go look for it tomorrow? I couldn't sleep that night because, well, how could you sleep after being chased by something so demonic? I honestly thought that it was going to come back at any time. I know it's pretty straightforward, but that's my story, and I hope you guys can give me some advice on what I should do. Should I be hunting it, or should I leave well enough alone? Also, do you think this was a skinwalker, or is this some other kind of beast? I'm sorry I don't have a description more than it just looked like a deer that was walking bipedally. There isn't much going on in Pennsylvania. At least in the rural areas where most of our pastimes include drinking oneself to sleep and driving trucks at highly suspect speeds down narrow roadways. Generally speaking though, I keep preoccupied with hunting. There's just something about chilling in nature that I love. I find a certain serenity there that is impossible to find out in city or urban areas. If you don't live in the country, I don't believe you'll ever understand that sort of peace or why we love it out there. Anyway, on to the hunting season. The story takes place while I was hunting out in early November, in a forest in the foothills of the Appalachians. I wasn't very far from my home, only a few minutes. It was late fall and the leaves were beginning to stop falling. The writing of harsh winter wasn't clearly written on the wall, so to speak. I was hunting white-tailed deer on this particular day as I hid around in the foliage and scanned the area with my Winchester 30-06 in tow. The gun was most certainly overpowered for a deer, but when you're in bear and elk country, you can never be too safe. The trail was a new hunting ground for me. It was refreshing as the spots I'd hunt in the days of yesteryear were now becoming increasingly encircled by subdivisions and civilization. As I continued walking my path, I began to become more engrossed with the beauty of my surroundings and less interested in what was happening with the wildlife around me. This ultimately led me to rip over a tree root that was winding along the path in front of me. The tree it belonged to split down the middle and massive in size. Now, the story should have ended there. I wish it would have. I wish it was just another beautiful hunt. Sadly, that just wasn't the case. Just past the tree, I was gazing at what was a rather unique smell. It wafted its way past my nose, and I initially believed there was a dead animal nearby, which likely also meant a bear could be close. I searched behind the tree, but to my surprise there was no carcass. There was also no predator or animal that I could see in the area. The scene was a sight I wished to see. All around were matted clumps of fur, which spread across the area. There was also vicious black fluid which led into a hollow which was overshadowed by a titanic root that led deep underground. I'm familiar with sickening scenes and the brutality of death within nature, but the smell in the air was so nauseating, it was almost like it was unnatural. It was a thick, coppery scent, like pennies in death. I felt myself retching involuntarily at the smell, and then the den ahead left me deeply disturbed. Although shaken a bit, I decided to continue my search for the deer I believe was still out there. As the day drew on and the sun beat upon me, I became less ardent in my quest for this possible deer. I was about to sit down and eat some lunch when I was overcome with an almost paranoia. I wasn't sure why, but something just didn't feel right. Not even thinking, I looked around and examined my surroundings. I saw nothing and was about to take a bite of my lunch when it dawned on me that something was bothering me. There was no sound. No bugs, animals, wind, anything. It was deathly silent out. As the realization struck me and I began to get up, I heard the snapping of a very large branch roughly 100 feet away, which was then followed by an ungodly screeching. It was an impossibly deafening and terrifying screech. It was as though the earth itself split and hell opened up, just long enough to sum up the suffering of the damned in one ear-splitting roar. I was scared out of my mind and immediately acquired my firearm and scanned the undergrowth slowly. Something huge was moving across the forest floor. I, however, could see nothing through the falling foliage, and so backtracked in the direction I had come in hopes to get a better view of whatever was stalking through the forest. It was as I ran I decided against the notion of getting a better view, and instead kept booking it as I realized I had not provoked this thing at all and it was not stalking me. That left me feeling a little bit more vulnerable. I had finally outrun the creature, or so I believed, and was beginning to hear the sounds of nature again. I felt comfortable right up until I realized the sound dead ahead was now gone. Whatever was out there had clearly circled around. I wasn't outrunning it at all. It was intelligent enough to try to cut off my path of escape. Terrified at the thought of what might be waiting beyond the tree line, I scrambled off into a different direction, down into a rock gully. I eventually slinked away near a cave and waited, hoping to hide my fear from this creature. It was at that point I heard a demonic snarling above me. The creature was above me and I was terrified out of my mind, praying my heart would grow silent long enough for the creature to move on. After what felt like an eternity, the creature began to move on, but my gun slipped off the rock wall it was mounted against and fell, making plenty of sound for the creature to notice. I could hear this thing's footsteps heading back as I painstakingly crawled toward the rifle. I reached for my gun, and as I did, the creature did the same. Instead of the smooth shellac of my rifle stock, my palm met a coarse, ragged fur, caked with mud and attached to a lanky, sinewy arm. The beast screamed, and as I shouldered my rifle and fired blindly out of the opening, I caught a glimpse of a yellowed fang and one blood-red eye. An eye that reflected a hatred more ancient than man. A hatred that said, "This is my forest. You have altered it through your presence, corrupted it, and I was here before you, and I will be here after." Human willpower paled in face of such uncompromising malice, and I shrank back against the rocks, robotically cycling bullets out of the cave. I sat there, dead-eyed, doing this for a long time. Overnight and well into the next morning. Over 18 hours of working a bolt and pulling the trigger. By the time I snapped out of my adrenaline-fueled haze, my mouth felt like a desert and my fingers felt as though they were made out of canvas stretched over dust. Shaking, I reached for my water bottle and gulped it down, spilling most of it down my front. Praying the beast was long gone, I inched my way out of the cave and ran as fast as my rickety legs would carry me, the 2 odd miles back to my truck, leaving most of my gear behind. Nothing pursued me, but the feeling of being hunted remained. I drove back to town at 80 miles per hour on a dirt road. My eyes were wide with fear and my hands gripping the wheel with white knuckles. Unable to bear the thought of my secluded home, I spent the night at a motel within town, and a bottle of cheap whiskey, and every light in the room turned on. The thought of the creature would not exit my mind. Was it a demon, loosed on Earth by some divine mistake, or just an animal? A cryptid lost to time and the memories of the trees. I didn't really know what it was, but I couldn't and still can't let it go. The fear eventually subsided, but as I sit at home writing this, I swear, hand to God, that I can hear a howling echo through the trees and across the mountains, telling me that I may never rest, and I may never forget. First off, let me say I love the channel. It keeps me entertained at work. So, I was told that I have some sort of attraction for the weird maybe, like I'm some sort of paranormal magnet. In my life, I have seen so many paranormal events that it's hard to remember them all, but there are a few that I remember like they happened yesterday. One of these events happened on a 130-acre ranch outside of Houston, Texas. My buddy, who we will call D for the sake of privacy, inherited this ranch from a family member who passed. It had been in his family for well over 100 years. It had a long dirt road that went straight from the front gate, through pastures of cows, and then past a thick forest off to the left that was great for hunting hogs and deer. We would go out and shoot guns and drink in the pasture closest to the back of the property. I know it was not the most responsible pastime. One morning I woke up before the sun was in the sky, packed up some ammo, my .45 and my .30-06 rifles, and headed out towards the woods. As I began walking from the house, I started hearing footsteps behind me. All I had for light was a small mag light that was apparently dying. I thought maybe the footsteps were that of a dog. Perhaps it got out and I didn't even notice. I would stop for a couple of steps out of sync with mine, and then it would stop, shortly after. I would swing the flashlight around, scanning the trees and grass, and I would see nothing. No dogs and no animals at all. I finally came to the dirt road that led to the back of the property and headed down it. All the while these footsteps continued to follow. Only having light enough to see about 7 or 8 feet in front of me, I moved slowly. Something white on the ground on the left side of the dirt road caught my eye. I stopped and knelt down to see a ring of small white pebbles in a circle on the ground. I thought it was odd as it was private property and the only people on it were me and Dee was back at the house passed out. I don't know if this was anything to do with that, but I saw something a couple of minutes earlier. I walked another couple of 100 feet and suddenly got an eerie feeling, like I was being watched. There was about a small 8-foot tall hay shed to the left of the dirt road. To the left of it I noticed a shadow moving. I pulled my .45 and crept closer. This thing was taller than the shed by at least a foot, skinny, and almost looked skeletal. It was humanoid in appearance, if only for the presence of its arms and 2 legs that made it stick upright. The legs though. The legs bent backwards like a dog or something. Its head was bulbous like they describe aliens. As I crept closer, now about 10 feet away, my gun was still drawn. I flashed the dim beam of light in its direction, and in a flash, this thing rounded the shed, and in 2 long strides leaped over the entire road and disappeared into the darkness. This road is as wide as your regular neighborhood road, so needless to say it was quite the jump. I wished I could say that was all this and it was gone, but it wasn't. I wasn't brave enough to make a shot either because I was so shocked and trembling so bad that even if I had shot at it, I probably would have missed. The aura this thing gave off was pure evil. I stood in shock for what seemed like forever. I finally called Dee on my cell phone, who was still sleeping at the house in front of the property, and frantically whispered, "Dude, come get me right now. There's something out here with me and it's not human." Dee came out as fast as his hangover self could muster. From where I was, I could make out the headlights from his truck in the far distance. I booked it. He picked me up and took me back to the house. I was shaken up for weeks, always scanning the darkness outside, hoping to not see it again. A year later, I decided to face my fear and go looking for this creature that I believe is still out there. That, however, is a story for another time. This happened when I was still about 5 years old. Living in a country in Southeast Asia, urban legends are common things here. But what I saw back then is unheard of and only my family knows about it. When I was still a baby, my parents didn't have their own house. My grandparents agreed to provide us with a house that was located in an open field village with only 3 other houses built and are about 500 meters away from each other. Even though the house was a bit uncomfortable being surrounded by tall grass in the middle of nowhere, we had no other choice. 5 years had passed, and we didn't encounter any problems. My parents always remembered to lock all the doors and windows, especially at night. However, one night around 4 a.m., which was still really dark out where I live, I was suddenly awoken for no reason. Our room was facing directly at the living room, and for some reason, my parents didn't like closing our bedroom door. Because of this, I had a full view of our couch, TV, and windows, all facing my direction. I noticed someone or something sleeping on our couch. It was still dark and the only source of light was from our bedroom lamp and the moonlight, so I thought it might be my dad. I looked over to my left and then saw that both my mom, dad, and sister were all sleeping beside me. This sent chills down my spine since whoever was sleeping on our couch shouldn't be in our house. At this moment, I was wide awake. I looked at the thing again and squinted my eyes to have a better examination of whoever was sleeping on our couch. As I did this, I concluded this thing wasn't human. It was big, like really big, about the height of a 6-foot person and the width of a grizzly bear, maybe even wider. I also noticed that this creature had really sharp edges around his body. Then, my gaze towards that thing stopped as the creature started to move in an attempt to stand up. I was so scared and didn't know what to do, so I just closed my eyes and tried my best to pretend that I was asleep. Not even 1 minute later, my 3-year-old sister started shaking furiously out of nowhere. I immediately looked back at the thing sleeping in our couch and was shocked to see that it wasn't there anymore. My sister's shaking woke up my parents as far as I know. She was having some sort of seizure. This shocked and confused my parents since our sister didn't have any illnesses around that time. Regardless, my parents called an ambulance. As the ambulance arrived, my dad carried my sister outside the house. When we reached our house's front gate, my sister stopped having a seizure. Instead, she stared at something. Something was on our front porch. As I looked at what she was staring at, a cold sweat started dripping all over my body, and I was just shook at what I saw. It was the creature. This time, with its visible red eyes, full of rage, destroying my bicycle apart. I ran outside the house as we all rode to the ambulance. We still lived in that house for another 3 years after buying our own home. As far as I know, only my sister and I had seen whatever that thing was. Up to this day, I still have no idea what it was, and I still have questions regarding that thing. What is it? How did it enter our house? And was it all in our imagination? And was it the reason behind my sister's sudden seizure? 13 years later, and the questions are still unanswered. I was a 15-year-old girl at the time and had recently just turned 15, and I was also very, very dumb. My story begins at home. It was around 10 at night and my friend and I decided we were hungry. We thought we could just walk 4 blocks down to the gas station to grab a quick snack, although it was quite dark out. As we were walking, we felt as if something was watching us, so we walked a bit faster, until my friend looks at me in a stutter. Do you see that? I turned around to see something crouched over on the sidewalk a few feet behind us. It didn't look exactly human. It was shaped differently and much, much bigger. We are now keeping our eye on it as we walk backwards when it starts to stand up. At this point, I see a big shadowy figure growing and coming towards us. We ran as fast as we could to the store and calmed down. As we began our walk home, we took a different route, but we still felt very on edge. We finally reached my house and got inside, and nothing was out of the ordinary. We were sitting down trying to understand what we just saw, until we heard my cat make a deep growl in the hallway. We turned to see that she had her hair standing up and was hissing. She saw something we didn't see, and it was very clear. She ran around in a panic, and that just freaked us out even more. Finally, I decided to give up and knock on my bedroom wall, toward the door my cat was mostly avoiding. I heard these 3 knocks come back. That being said, my friend left my house, crying, and I no longer live there. I have had many experiences in that house, but this was probably the craziest one because it happened in front of somebody else, so we could actually validate that I was not crazy, and something creepy was definitely following us home that night. Now whether it was a cryptid or a ghost or something else, I don't know. But thank you for sharing my story. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed these allegedly true, creepy encounters with cryptid creatures, be sure to hit that like button as it helps me out a ton. If you're new to the swamp, why not hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a new video, as I upload them almost every single day on all things natural and supernatural. Honestly, these were some pretty good ones. Some of them were a little short, but I think they were all worth it in the end. There's some creepy stuff, and I don't know if you guys have noticed, but we're very close to episode 25, which is the next video, which is going to be a very, very long one. I don't know if you've also noticed, but there seems to be a lot of creepy bipedal deer creatures out there. Let me know your thoughts on that in the comments down below. If you have a story you would like to share in a future video, be sure to visit swampdweller.net and submit your story there. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that keep this channel going. I appreciate you guys so much, and thanks for always supporting this series. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.